Now that the honeymoon period is officially over, and since I like to actually sit on a game for a month or so before really giving my full review, it's finally that time, so let's talk about everything from Monster Hunter Wilds. So we're going to start this off with the low rank campaign, and I honestly really enjoyed this. I really appreciate the attempt to go deeper than what we've been given before, and also in the presentation of it. It actually has a narrative flow to it, and just overall so much more polished than anything I've personally seen from this franchise before. You know, the atmosphere they give these scenes with the weather and the cinematography, honestly, it's not something I was expecting to be in this game in the slightest. And they do such a fantastic job of conveying the scale of these monsters with the fear that would come from something of that size and the sheer impact they'd have. They also give us the hardest line in the entire franchise.
Ah, now death greets me with a new mask.
By my own order.
And on top of all that, they actually, and this might be controversial to some of you and some people, like they actually made me care about Naruto to an extent. I know he's a dumb, naive kid, but that's his entire point. He's supposed to be, that's his narrative arc. He goes from this sheltered kid with no knowledge of the outside world or even his own, to someone who's embracing the duty that hunters have to have. And honestly, by the end, I enjoyed what they tried to do with him. Now with that said, it's not without its flaws, and trust me, there's flaws in this story that I can still kind of forgive because this is their real first shot at an actual proper story. And I hope the flaws in this are addressed in future games and future generations. But the pacing of this story is kind of all over the place. The first two acts are as slow as they can possibly be, and then the third act is just a world record sprint to the finish. But I'm going to be a bit forgiving here because I like to think that the reason why it's so slow for the most part is because with the addition of the sacrets and how quick everything is now, you don't really get a chance to just take in everything that's going on around you and actually really look at the environments that they've made. And that's a lot of these games, it's just exploring the locations, gathering items, finding tracks, hunting the monsters down. And for the most part in Wilds, that's pretty much gone, and I'll be honest, I do kind of miss it, but slowing the story down to really take in these environments isn't necessarily the best way to skirt around this issue personally, but I appreciate that there's an attempt to have like their cake and eat it as well. And then the pace of the third act is just way too fast. They set up all these themes and this narrative with Nata and Arkveld, and it's basically just there for lip service. Like, it honestly feels like it's a halfway point for a larger story, and I guess it is because the narrative in these games also always carries over to high rank. But in Wilds, once you get to high rank and you've beaten low rank, and that, you know, there's a few cutscenes and some are quite interesting thematically and what the events that happen in them, but they're less explored than the end of low rank. And it's honestly a shame because they go to this effort to give Gore Magala a reason to be in this game, because let's be honest, you can't really have a Magala walking around without the frenzy and not have it be part of the story. But the relationship between Arkveld and Gore is such an interesting idea, and it never really gets explored, just like how Wyveria is never really explored, or Nata and Arkveld. And honestly, it's kind of disappointing because the bones of everything here are really good. It's just, for me, there needs to be a bit more meat on it, but we'll talk about this again in a minute. Because as we all know, once you finish low rank and high rank, you're into the end game, you're into the grind. And I'm not overly hot on this end game. I don't think there's enough monsters that give out the best rewards. Like, having it basically just be Tempered Arkveld and Gore to get the highest rarity weapons in this game seems a bit backwards, because personally, everything below it at this level is basically redundant, and you're fighting the top to get the top almost immediately, which I understand is how games work, don't get me twisted here. I just felt like I went from doing the first tempered monsters and getting that first Artian weapon to doing Arkveld and Gore, completely skipping the rest of the roster. And I'm also not sure how I feel about the fact that they brought in all these fantastic weapon designs back into the core game, only to shove us straight back into using weapons that, let's be honest, aren't too different from the basic iron weapons from World, with the exception of just a few flashy bits. The irony here isn't lost on me. But who knows, maybe I'm just salty that the hammer stole the greatsword's rocket power and the arting animation for greatsword isn't all that, and I think I just miss it, to be honest. Like, they're not bad designs, I just want my rocket powered greatsword back. But because there's only really 2 monsters worth going for because they give the most rewards, and there's not really much reason for me personally to grind out for the God Row Artian, it feels like the end game here is lacking a lot. But we're going to put that to one side because I just want to talk about what makes Monster Hunter and the reason why we're all here, and that is of course the monsters. This roster as a whole I adore. I love Chasacabra, the new punching bag for Wilds. It's giving Best Boy Dodogama vibes mixed in with Battletoads. It's honestly fantastic. And it's fantastic is going to be what I say for most of the roster here, so I'll spare you the boredom of me repeating it over and over again. Now maybe I'll do a roster ranked video instead, just to not say fantastic over and over again.
NANI?!
Wait. Nice.
But honestly, my standouts here are going to be the same basic answer as I imagine most people. So it's the Apexes, it's Arkveld, it's Gore. They're all my favourites. And honestly, they should be. Like, they were the big marketing monsters, and a flagship should always carry its weight. But saying that, my absolute favourite out of all of them is New Udra. Like, what a surprise that was. Like, an entirely new skeleton, and it's nothing like we've had before. So compliments to the chef who cooked that one up, because he's absolutely magnificent. But I have two complaints about the roster. The first being the Guardians, because they are so wasted in this game. There's not enough of them, and having them just be limited to one zone that's arguably the weakest in the game is just such a shame. They're such a cool concept, and there's literally zero reason to really go after them. Like, I honestly believe that the story should have just let them roam out of Wyveria and into the other zones, and that could have helped fleshed out the high rank story a bit more. But it is what it is. They're there. I do recognize the essentially unlimited potential they have, because the monsters here aren't just restricted to what's native to the Forbidden Lands. You know, we have Fulgur Anjanath and Ebony Odogaron, so there's a lot of potential here. I just hope they expand upon it. And my second one is the frenzied monsters. You know, I'm under the impression that these frenzied monsters aren't working as intended, because they don't hit harder than normal, and with the health trade-off for them in that regard, it's just so disappointing, because you get into the hunt and it's over before it's even begun. So I hope that gets fixed sooner rather than later, and it's the same with the Guardians. They're restricted to one zone. Personally, I think Gore should be able to wander around everywhere, and everything in this game should be able to get frenzied, but that's just me. Because if everything can be frenzied and the Guardians can walk about everywhere, that honestly bumps up and helps the difficulty situation out a lot. So I know people are tired of talking about it, and is the game too easy, yes or no? But I brought it up in my impressions video, and I think I've settled on my actual opinion on this, and I do think monsters in general need their health bumped up by about 25%, just to compensate for the uptime we have on everything now. Because everything else feels like how it did in World and Rise, so if anything, it's at least not easier than the last decade or so of Monster Hunter games, at least from my memory of it. But I think where the actual problem lies is the Palicos and the Sacreds, and these two they're not broken, but problematic might be a better word for it, because the Palico, even just looking at World, the Palico in that game only had the one ability, and you had to choose what equipment you ran with it. In Wilds, that's not the case. This little walking armory has everything, and I didn't notice that until he had already got everything off, and everything was just popping off in one hunt. And he's just so good. Whatever Capcom have done to the Palico AI is absolutely crazy. Like, this little dude is always on time for heals, always on time for cleansers. He's essentially a free revive. He's got a giant Vigor Wasp, the Plunderang goes off, the Wrath from above is nuts. And the real kicker is he knows where monsters are going to be when they move zones, because he's always setting traps right where they need to be. And that's obviously impacting everything, because it means us, the players, don't really have to worry about any of that, and we can just focus on the big monster in front of us, which means more uptime, which means more damage, which means shorter hunts. You know, it makes it feel easier. And on top of that, if the Palico somehow misses a beat, which is rare, you have an almost instant recovery from a knockdown with the Sacred to get you out of any situation, which yes was also in Rise, and no, I'm guilty of using it for a long time, but I've weaned myself off that quite quickly, because I feel like that option should have been taken out. That's just a little bit too much. So with the pair of them, like, they're obviously having an impact, but everything else is the exact same as it has been. So I'd like to see some kind of tweak there, but I'm not going to hold my breath on it personally. And that brings us to something I want to talk about for a couple of minutes, the future of this game, because they've done something really interesting here with how the final low rank hunt plays out. So what does it mean for the game that they've locked us out of hunting Xochitl more than once? Is what I was going to talk about until they just dropped the title update showcase and threw my theory completely out the window, but oh well, we'll just talk about that instead. So I'm honestly really excited for Mizutsune returning for Wilds. I really hope the rest of the Fated 4 all end up in the same game as well, because I really want to hunt Gammoth. He's the only one I've never had the chance to fight against since all the others have been in both World and Rise. But Mitzi here looks great, and I adored the hunt in Rise Break, and Arch-Tempered Ray Dow is going to be fun. He's another great hunt. It's cool that we get the player hub back, because that means it won't be so fucking asinine to play with people, but I'm not holding out for a miracle here. Xochitl being back is a no-brainer. I don't know why people ever thought otherwise, to be honest, but it was always going to come back, right? Whether that was just like how they've announced it, or they were going to push the live service aspects of everything, and we get a bit more story between the expansions. But it was always going to return, and I honestly can't wait. I never felt like I got the chance to really appreciate that fight like everything else, so seeing it come back this quick is a win for me. And of course, we finally get the reveal of Legiricus, or however you pronounce that, Legiricus, Legai, Caris, I don't know. After all these years of waiting, seeing him in the marketing for World and then nothing again in Rise, and he's finally here, and he's another new monster for me personally. Only bad thing here is that he's for the summer, but the wait is almost over. But that's another great thing about Monster Hunter in general. It doesn't matter if you're a veteran, a 5er, or a new player with 6th gen. Everyone gets excited. Older players are hyped to see a fan favourite finally return, and players like me are just excited for new monsters to face. It's nice to see an online gaming community just be all excited about the same thing and not at each other's throats. So to bring this all to a head, I'm really having a hard time separating this from just base World. It wouldn't be fair to compare it to the entire Worldborn generation. There's some things that I think World did a lot better, but it's undeniable that the combat in Wilds is far and away the best it's ever been. And it's just things like that that are keeping these two games in a level playing field for me, which isn't it negative? It's hard as hell to keep on upping yourself in the creative field, so to even get something that's just as good again is something to be applauded for. But with the lack of an endgame that's worth it for me personally, I can really feel it's going to greatly impact the amount of time I put into this game in comparison to last gen. I just hope going forward that they give me a reason to stick around outside of the title updates every few months leading to the expansion. So with everything, I love this game. I've got my issues with it, but they're outweighed by everything else this has to offer, and I'm excited to see where they take us going forward personally. And with that, let me say thank you so much for watching. If you made it this far, leave a like and let me know how you're finding Wilds. Who's your favourite out of the new gen roster? Personally, I adore new Udra and new Skeleton in the game, and the visuals of that fight are just peak Monster Hunter. Make sure to subscribe if you like gaming and anime. We've got a lot of cool stuff on the channel and then more stuff coming down the pipeline. So I've been Mitch692, you've been great, and this has been my Monster Hunter Wilds review. So peace.